My name is Marty Case. I'm the author of The Relentless Business of Treaties, How Indigenous Land Became U.S. Property. This video is an overview of Part 6 of the book, the final section, entitled Myth Makers. At this point in the book, we've covered how speculation, land speculation, was the main motivation for U.S. expansion across the continent, how trade was the mechanism by which the U.S. acquired indigenous land, and how the extraction of minerals and timber provided an additional motivation and source of wealth and helped turn the natural world into commodities in the U.S. property system. In all of these aspects, the trade, the land speculation, the extraction of minerals, the lumber, the transportation, men who were making money, fortunes from these activities, actually attended the treaties by which land was ceded by indigenous nations to the U.S. That transformation was too important to leave to other people. But the treaty signers did not only participate in the events that made history. They went on to make the history of the events in which they participated. Consequently, what often passes for history in the United States, the American myth, is really just an institutionalization of the point of view of a relatively small group of people who were active in U.S. Indian affairs in the early part of the country's history. These men created the documents, the journals, the reports that became the primary documents of historical research. Men who signed U.S. Indian treaties owned literally hundreds of newspapers in which they battled out among themselves political positions, but always presented a colonialist settler point of view. The result was what we might call a boat or wagon beginning to history, in which these people who were generating historical documents shaped a narrative in which indigenous people always lived in a space, whether it was a county or a town or a state, and evidently nothing happened for millennia because nothing gets mentioned in this vision of history. And then a white person arrived in a boat or wagon and history started. Generally, the last thing that happened before history started was the U.S. Indian Treaty. So this vision, this boat or wagon beginning to history, effectively erases indigenous presence in a local area. Consequently, the names of the treaty signers were written on the land. Our counties, our lakes, our cities, all bear the names of treaty signers who were present at the transfer of indigenous property to U.S. control. But probably the most direct way that the men who attended treaties shaped history was by creating historical societies. Treaty signers were among the founders of the state historical societies of Ohio, Michigan, New York, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Nebraska, Montana. And in establishing these institutions, they promulgated a particular cultural point of view. I just want to read the Articles of Incorporation for the Minnesota Historical Society, which was created 3 months after Minnesota became a territory. The object of said society shall be the collection and preservation of Indian curiosities and other matters calculated to illustrate and perpetuate the history and settlement of said territory. And this would become the formula for what passes for U.S. history. Indigenous identity as a curiosity, colonialist settlement as history. But just as the effect of the treaties was to turn the natural world, the land and everything into commodities, this version of history is itself a commodity. It's packaging the past for sale. In order to understand what actually happened in treaties, in U.S.-Indian relations, in the history of the continent, I think we have to examine relationships that go way beyond this commodified version of history.